And go.
Hi, I'm Sana Liu. I am a professor in bioethics, psychiatry, and global health at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. And I was the inaugural Vice Dean for Faculty Development and Diversity in the School of Medicine until I stepped down this past March. I'd like to welcome you to this session of the Society for Investigative Dermatology, where we have a wonderful panel talking about diversity and inclusion. I'd like to go ahead and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Byrd, I'd like you to introduce yourself first, please.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so honored and just a joy to be here. I am Angel Byrd, and I would like to start off by saying that I graduated from Tougaloo College, which is an HBCU in Mississippi. I then went on to Brown, where I completed my MD, PhD, and Dr. Bennett was my Associate Dean of Diversity, so this is very gratifying for me. After finishing up there, I went to do an Ethnic Skin Fellowship at Hopkins, where Dr. Kane was the chair of the department, and the director of my fellowship was Dr. Jeanette Okoye. And now Dr. Okoye and I are now at Howard, where we're spearheading efforts there to lead translational efforts in understanding the immunobiology and skin of color. And so I am an assistant professor there and an adjunct assistant professor at Hopkins. And our main disease of focus right now is hidradenitis suppurativa. And so it's just a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for having me. I'm truly looking forward to the discussions.
Dr. Bennett.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jabbar Bennett. I'm a biomedical scientist by training, but have spent nearly the past 20 years helping support members of underrepresented groups pursue education, training, and careers in the biomedical sciences and health professions. I most recently served as the inaugural Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at Northwestern University, as well as Associate Professor of Medicine. It's truly a pleasure to be here today to add to the conversation and hopefully be a resource to people who are watching as, again, we think about how to diversify the pathway toward dermatology, investigative research, clinical practice, and so forth. We're really happy to be here.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I think this will be a great panel. Maybe we could start off if each of you could talk a little bit about your experiences in medical school and in dermatology as an identified member of a minoritized group. Many of us may be familiar, for instance, with the recent publication of Dr. Damon Tweedy, who talked about his experiences as a medical school student and a psychiatrist. Could you speak to your own experiences and what you thought may have been helpful, not helpful, as you became a physician and or scientist and continue in that practice, in that role?
Sure, so I can comment on that. So I will say, being an African-American woman in science and medicine, having grown up in the deep South of Mississippi, and then going to medical school and graduate school in Providence, Rhode Island, was a huge, major transition. But it was a transition that was made available, and the nuances was already thought out through a program called the Brown Tougaloo Partnership, where I got accepted to medical school as a sophomore in undergrad, and it was purposeful interaction. And I think that's something that we also have to always remember, that we have to identify those students at earlier stages. And then when we place them in these new environments, we have to embrace them. And so this program did that for me. And so when I got to Providence and to Brown, it was constant purposeful interactions. There was diversity and inclusion embedded in the curriculum. So I won't say that there were not challenges that arose, but I do feel like we talked about the bold topics that needed to be discussed. And through that, I was able to make it through Brown. And it's something that I cherish in my trajectory, going from an HBCU to an Ivy League, and now being back at Howard, being an HBCU. So I learned a lot along the way, and I'm open to answering any specific questions. But was it a transition? Yes. But I think I was able to endure the transition because of the things that were in purposefully in place.
Thank you. Dr. Bennett?
Sure. So I, again, attended two historically Black colleges for my undergraduate and graduate degrees. My doctoral degree I received from Harry Medical College. But I did go to Harvard Medical School to engage in postdoctoral research. And it was there, being in that environment that was predominantly white, that I realized I was the only person who looked like me in my lab, but also in the department at that time. And this was around 20 years ago. So it was based on that experience and reflecting on my own sort of exposure to that opportunity and then gaining access to it that I decided I would do something to help expose other members of underrepresented groups to places like Harvard Medical School and then many of the other places I've worked, like Brown, that Angel mentioned, to help support folks who are, again, pursuing clinical or biomedical science careers. It can feel lonely when you are the only one. But what I can say helped me during that time, especially first sort of coming to Harvard Medical School as a trainee, was having college classmates in the area, having family in the area, but also connecting with the faith community at the time was really helpful and important to me.
Thank you. Were there specific obstacles that either of you faced? I mean, Dr. Bennett, you talked about the loneliness and being the only person that looked like you. I'm wondering if there were other challenges and if during the course of your careers, you have found ways of helping those in power recognize what those obstacles and challenges might be.
Absolutely. So I'll just say that challenges abound and they look different wherever you are. If you are a member of an underrepresented group in a majority environment, there's already going to be a sort of more intensity or more intense look or feeling like you're under the microscope all of the time. I think there are things that happen subtly, but there are also things that structurally are in place that can provide barriers for members of underrepresented groups as it relates to knowing what the pathway is toward advancement, but also overcoming various obstacles along the way and meeting benchmarks, not knowing which resources exist and how to even access those types of things happen commonly. So for me, it's been connecting with people who have been where I'm trying to go, connecting with people who are further along the pathway than I am, and sort of relying on not only that information, but also support that has helped me to be successful. And again, that's what I've tried to do for others as well.
Thank you. Before I ask Dr. Byrd the same question, I'm wondering if you could give us some insight into the strategies you use to identify those people who would provide support and give you the kind of guidance that you needed as you move through your career. Because in my mind, people make up a system. And so there are people who are very invested in maintaining a system and people who are invested in helping others move through that system. So I'm wondering what strategies you were able to use successfully to identify those individuals.
Sure, that's a great question. So there, in some cases, there are formal mentoring programs, or there may be affinity groups where people, again, who share various identities come together for support. So I tapped into those networks. While I was the only one who looked like me or shared my identity in many ways, within my lab and department, I knew there was a broader community. So taking the initiative to sort of step out and be bold and to network is really important. I continue to do that today and encourage everyone to do so. But when those formal mechanisms aren't in place, it is, again, the unofficial mentoring and advising that really makes a difference. Stepping out and going to seminars, going to different talks to not only hear information, but to meet people and to understand the various ways that people, approach problems and think about it and so forth.
Thank you. Dr. Byrd?
So in terms of the challenges, right, just
right.
The transition and how we're dealing with them. Yes, I had many challenges, many obstacles from many different angles. And it's something that I've learned to embrace as I tell my story. Like I said, transitioning from Mississippi to Providence was a challenge from a lot of different angles. Also thinking about, I went to a very small institution with a very intimate education where the class size might have been 2 to maybe the biggest class 8, to going in Brown where I was in a classroom of 100, 200 plus, you know. And if I didn't have those professors and those mentors that continuously believed in me and knew that I'm capable. It's just my style of learning might be a little bit different, or the way that I actually attain the material. And so, like I said, thankfully I was at an institution that identified that and they had things in place to help me with those particular challenges. Another thing I would say is my lab that I was in, my PI was a white man, and we actively had the bold conversations. We educated each other. You know, he would ask us questions about what it was like to be an African-American from Mississippi, now in Providence, immersed in this field of science and this field of medicine. So I always appreciate his eagerness to learn and to educate and to ask the questions. And I think if we did more of that today, like in all the different scenarios, we just take the moment to ask the questions and not only ask them, but listen, I think we would get, you know, a lot further along. And so I think in terms of leadership, it's just like embracing that mentality and being able to hear from people like myself who've been through it. What were those challenges? You know, how did you get through? Were there things in place? Identify the gaps and fulfill them. And so thankfully, along the way, like, although I've had many challenges, I've been able to get through them with a lot of support, a lot of mentorship, not only from like mentors, but also peer-peer mentorship. Like, you know, even some of my white colleagues at Brown helped me through, you know. So I'm just thankful to have been in that type of environment.
So one of the things that you said was that this mentor, the person who ran the lab, would ask you questions, right, in an effort to understand. And that becomes important if we want people in power to understand. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions for how someone might approach those questions sensitively, so as not to further distance people, right, and in a way that communicates that they do want to understand, but that they're not putting the burden of their education on this other person.
Right, exactly, because I know that is definitely a thing in this realm.
Yes,
of trying to understand. Dr. Jonathan Reichner, I will say that I always love the fact of how he would always make sure that it was a part of our training. You know what I mean? So it's just like we had other things that we had regularly. We had journal clubs, you know, we had it actively implemented. And so it gave us that space to know that, okay, this is a time when we have set aside where we're just going to talk. And I think being receptive and knowing that if I do say something that's offensive or that, you know, you didn't perceive it the right way, the only way that I'm going to know not to do it again is if you tell me. And so I just think we all have to have this open attitude, this open mentality to know that we have to learn and learn together. And then the more that we learn together, we can input of how to make the change and the difference. And it is definitely challenging, but I think it, like I said, it just needs to be purposeful, and it needs to be a part of the training, a part of the day-to-day, embedded a time set aside for it. And so you know that things will not spiral out of control, because you know that that time is coming up where we're gonna just sit down, talk about it, deal with it, learn from it, and appreciate one another.
Well, it sounds like from what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm misreading it, that it's not just a question of asking the questions and hearing the answers, but of asking and hearing with compassion as well.
Absolutely. It's so very important. Absolutely.
Great.
May I add something before we go
please.
on? And I've just been reflecting on the original question about challenges, but also Angel's response. I don't want people who will view this to think that Angel and I have not had challenges in the way that we might think of them related to overt racism, sexism, and things like that. But what I can say, I'll speak for myself, but I believe I can say this for Angel as well. I believe we intentionally entered the majority training environments that we chose to enter with our eyes wide open. I believe our original decisions to even attend historically Black colleges and universities was maybe with an intent of being around people who looked like us, shared our experiences and so forth, but also to get the type of social support and character building that you get from those places. So from faculty and staff for the most part, who are not only concerned about your academic development, but your personal development, your social development and responsibility. So with that said, you know, going from Tougaloo to Brown wasn't as big a shock as it could have been culturally. And there was a network of alumni from Tougaloo there at Brown when Angel arrived. And much like, again, I found my network and my circle and plugged into my community. I was a trainee at Harvard Medical School coming from a historically Black college in Nashville, that's Meharry. So yeah, I just think I want to be sure that I say for those who don't have advisors or mentors or sponsors who are helping them out along the way as they even make critical decisions about transitional points in the career toward investigative or clinical dermatology, you know, then they probably won't be able to speak in the way that we are now regarding, we had a challenge, but we knew what to do. We knew that maybe if we couldn't handle it ourselves, there were people or there was at least a network to tap into.
Thank you. Dr. Byrd, you talked a bit about the integration of these issues, for instance, in Journal Club, that it was a part of your training. And I'm wondering if there are specific actions that you think that either of you might think that allies might take in their daily lives to help support people as part of their training.
When I think about that, I think about, so just think about in terms of like the residency training. We have grand rounds where we talk about these difficult cases and these complex situations and how to approach them as part of our training. We have M&Ms where you're able to see, okay, this is how this situation unfolded. Perhaps if we intervened here, this person might have had a better outcome, right? So I just think that maybe, you know, tack onto that. Maybe we should have like some type of, you know, open discussion about, okay, this is an example of a microaggression. This is what a microaggression is. First and foremost, I think we need to define some of these things to make sure that we are all understanding what it means. And so maybe role playing and, you know, saying, okay, this is what it looks like. This is how we could have handled this differently. So this person wouldn't have felt, you know, this way or the other. So I again, just this purposeful interaction, this purposeful training and purposeful things in place so that we can just see it and deal with it as it is.
Dr. Bennett, would you like to add to that?
I think that was good, but also for anyone who may be presenting in a journal club, especially for the first time, who's new to the environment and the culture, I think it's really helpful to have someone, you know, assist them in that preparation and think about, again, the delivery and what the engagement would be like in that space. I think it's important to acknowledge for anyone who's new, especially to an environment who has to present, the level of anxiety that exists. But if you are a thoughtful and aware mentor, advisor, PI, you might imagine the extra added sort of, again, anxiety or stress that may be put on a person who may be a member of an underrepresented group, or in some cases that could be a woman or racial ethnic minority, or even a sexual gender minority who, you know, again, may be out and has identified themselves in that way. So it's really important to think about context and settings, and that you provide the equitable and individual support that people need.
Thank you. So we've been talking about what happens when someone is already in a position, right? Whether they're a student, whether they're a faculty member, but maybe we can take a moment and look at the application process. What can we do to prevent implicit bias, microaggressions during an application and interview process? And this could be for medical school students, this could be for postdoc fellowships, this could be for faculty positions. How might we prevent it from happening? And then if someone is an applicant in one of those processes and experiences this, what might be their recourse? How might they handle the situation?
Yeah, so I think this is a topic that's really hot in a lot of different fields. I know dermatology is speaking on it, and the governing bodies of dermatology, of how to make it more of a holistic approach. I know standardized testing is something that they're thinking about in terms of not letting it weigh as much. Also just learning the person and who that person is, first and foremost. Not being labeled by a test score, not being labeled by so many other things, but meeting that person where they are and learning where they are and looking into their potential and what they're capable of doing. So that more holistic approach, which I'm very happy to hear that in the field of dermatology that has been not as inclusive as other fields, that they are now doing that. And so I also think that in preparation for those students to get to that level, I'm a firm believer that we all play an active role of reaching back and starting, early, with high school, with like undergrads or people that, are in that pipeline that are hopefully will be sitting at that interview one day. It's not just like something haphazard. You've been molding them to that. I know now for my medical students that we're training, like Dr. Bennett was saying, I try to introduce them to the journal club and to presenting to the residents and to the attendings earlier on, I even have like high school and undergrads on the team now. So I just think that early exposure and all of us who have come through the pipeline take a responsibility and hold ourselves accountable and hold everybody else and our peers accountable, where we're actually looking out for the next generations to come, and so that we can stop all of that. So by the time it gets to the table, we've already been planning for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
I can mention a few concrete things. I think it's really important for anyone who wants to serve on a graduate or medical student admissions committee, maybe even a committee looking at trainees and faculty as well, that they have some type of training, some education and training around what bias is, and an acknowledgement that we all have biases, but how they may be addressed. I also think it's really important to have a process that everyone understands outlined in the beginning of any search, sort of understanding what rubric will be used, understanding what questions will be asked, so that every applicant is treated the exact same way and are asked the same questions, and that objectivity is sort of utilized throughout the entire process, from vetting applications and CBUs to having discussions during, deliberations. I think that's keenly important.
Thank you. And for applicants who feel that they have not gotten a fair opportunity, that they've been, and I certainly have heard this happen, where people experience microaggressions even during the course of an interview or an application process, and perhaps the person who spoke the microaggression isn't even aware that that was what happened. How might you suggest an applicant deal with that?
Yeah, that's tough, right?
It is tough. That's why I'm asking a tough question.
Tough question. Yes, you have to ask it. I find that you always have to live in your truth, right? And it's always about how you do things. And so if that was to happen, and if it's a program that you are going to see yourself, that's going to, train you and you're going to be there, you should be able to be open about this. It's not about what you say, how you say it sometimes. So I think you should be able to report back and not feel that you'll be penalized, even ask, say, hopefully I can say this and tell you what I experienced, just as positive feedback or negative feedback or just feedback in general. And then it could be an opportunity for that applicant to show their leadership roles, you know, in this space of diversity and inclusion, because it might just be a situation where it's just another time to educate. I'm always looking for these opportunities, or maybe this is a time where I just need to educate, but it's all about doing it in the right way. And so maybe if every program has this opportunity where you can give this feedback, you know, and I know they do it via surveys and everything. And so just make it a more open process and know that you won't be penalized for you being able to be honest.
Right. So ultimately, we want the applicants to be empowered, and they can only be empowered if they understand the process that they're engaging in. So I think it's our responsibility to let applicants know, and those who are members of underrepresented groups, this is what's going to happen. These are the types of people you'll meet. These are some particular scenarios you find yourself in. And if this happens, here's what you should do. And I'll just say quickly, I have a mentee who was an undergrad at Brown, who is an underrepresented minority, who interviewed at an Ivy League institution for medical school, had a very negative interaction with someone there during an interview, reported it, did receive a apology, and later was offered a full ride to attend that medical school, which my mentee chose to take based on the overall experience, but also I think the response of that institution to the complaint that had been made. So I think we have to empower people to sort of do what's right, to stand up for themselves and do that without fear.
Well, I really appreciate those comments, because I think it gives people the courage, right, to be able to report it and not internalize it or not feel like they have no recourse. Are there things that you think the Society of Investigative Dermatology might do moving forward to enhance diversity and inclusion in the profession?
So thankfully, I'm happy to see that they already have things in place. So I do find that first acknowledging, know that there's a gap and we need to fill this gap. So I know they have the Diversity and Inclusion Committee and other ongoing things. I know they do an active role in making sure that when we go to our national meetings, that the speakers, you know, some look like me. So that's great to know. I also feel like there could be more purposeful interaction. I know that they work with programs like SNMA. There are other programs, SACNAS, there's other programs that's geared to more of the research sector, Leadership Alliance. There's so many other programs out there that they can really join forces with, especially thinking about those medical schools that might not have a derm program. How do those students get exposed? Maybe as a society, we should take on that responsibility. So just, again, purposeful interactions and purposeful planning.
I agree totally. I think the society has to be very intentional about its efforts and think about the pathway toward dermatology. So are there ways to engage with undergraduate students who are considering dermatology before they enter medical school? So how do you identify those students? So thinking about ways to support potentially summer research training experiences or clinical exposure activities, ways that, again, potentially PhD students as well as medical students can have opportunities to train and receive fellowships to attend the annual meeting, you know, putting these students and trainees in front of professionals who are practicing, you know, who are doing research and doing clinical practice to see what is possible, and to sort of, again, understand and demystify what the process is to get there is really, really important.
We have just a few moments left. I'm wondering if each of you might like to have a few closing words, a final message to our audience before we go into breakout rooms.
I guess in terms of just my mantra and like how I live life is just always just acknowledging your self-worth, knowing that what you can do, and knowing that if you put your mind to something and you have that support and that mentorship, that you can do it, and always be in this education seeking of knowledge type mode, and just go out to define your destiny and be fearful and trying to seek it in all means necessary.
Yeah, I would say that individuals have to, again, advocate for themselves. Don't wait for someone to provide an opportunity. Expect challenges and also begin to think about how you're going to deal with them before they occur. Build your circle, your community of people in whatever space you're in, and also broaden your network. You know, when you go to meetings at your institution and so forth, because it does take a broad community. But you heard Angel say, first you have to be committed to the idea that this is what you want to do. And that means you have to be committed to persevere, because challenges are going to happen. So you just have to, again, expect them, anticipate them, and also choose how you'll decide to deal with them as they come.
Well, thank you. Thank you,
I
Dr.
might have said be fearful, but I meant to say be fearless. So you just go out and you get it.
Yes, be fearless.
Be fearless, absolutely.
Fearless, yes. Well, I'd like to thank both of you. This has been great, and it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to meet each of you as well. And I think we go to our breakout room soon. Thank you.
Thank you.